enlighten us on how you want to be a graduate student who strikes off on their own doing a project?
How you don't want to be that person, I think. I'm really excited that the Texas Research Data Center is here because I used it as a graduate student and as a postdoc. I was at the UCLA Data Center, and then I was at the Michigan one as the postdoc, and then I came here, and here it is. So I'm thrilled. So a little bit of background. My dissertation at UCLA, I was looking at ethnic entrepreneurship, and my dissertation wasn't going to be written as a book. It was going to be written as a series of different articles. So I know some people have different ways in which they, try to write their dissertation. Mine was written really like articles that could be submitted alone on the topic of ethnic entrepreneurship. So I had worked with the census on my master's, so I had familiarity with it. And that was right when I was thinking about concentration effects, co-ethnic concentration, and how co-ethnic concentration in an area facilitates self-employment participation and earnings of self-employed people, but also co-ethnic workers. A lot of the literature at that time was really looking at MSA. That was the smallest, accessible geographic area that you could use on the census. And I had substantive questions about, if you could go smaller, would the same trajectory or predictions hold up? So I really wanted to use track level data to look at how concentration effects and affect self-employment outcomes. So after the master's, I knew what the PUMs could offer me, and I also knew that I wanted a more refined geographic area. So I looked at the 1 in 6 long form, and that was what I wrote my proposal on. I was also looking at ethnic groups with really small n's in the census. So I was looking at immigrant Korean male self-employed people. So there was like 5. I couldn't find any of them. So one of the justifications was, I think I'm going to find enough with the 1 in 6, but I needed access to this data. So I made that case, and they went for it, and there were more. So I don't know if I can tell you. Well, so I was able to do that. So one of the papers that I wrote was on that track level data and how track level influenced the predictions of self-employment. It actually was contrary to a lot of what the ethnic entrepreneurship literature had written up to that point. So I thought it was really nice finding. Another aspect of my dissertation was looking at social capital. So in the ethnic entrepreneurship literature, there's this idea that if you have co-ethnic networks, they help you open a business. So if you have co-ethnic networks and resources that you could generate from your co-ethnic community, it was going to have a positive effect on your self-employment outcomes. I was not so sure that resources gotten by your co-ethnic community were going to serve you well as far as your income returns, because that basically, to me, that meant you can't access a bank. So you're borrowing from your brother, or you're borrowing from an uncle, or something like that. So I also knew that at this RDC they had the the characteristics of business owners, and actually Alfred Nucci, who you mentioned, used this a lot, and I found his working papers, and I wanted that data, and then I found out that it was at an RDC, and I was at UCLA, so it was just totally random. There's a lot of randomness in the way that I got this stuff. So when I wrote the proposal to gain access, I asked for a series of questions around ethnic entrepreneurship using 2 different data sets in that proposal. So you could basically answer multiple questions with one proposal, and then you don't have to write different proposals and things like that. So you should really know what kind of questions you want answered and craft that proposal so that you can go ahead and do answer multiple questions with multiple different, data sets while you're doing it. And I also found really interesting information on that, because the characteristics of business owners has stuff like, who did you borrow your money with? Who did you borrow your money from to start your business? How much did you start with? And it also has longevity questions, which Census doesn't have. So these were really nice questions, nice data for me to get my hands on. Cautionary tale, I did not have a mentor who was involved. I was all by myself, and it was really hard. I had no idea what I was doing. And I needed a lot of help. So at some point, as I'm scratching my head in an RDC with the windowless, painful place to be, banging my head against the wall, I had to tell my advisors that they needed to come and help me. Because at some point I'm a graduate student, I don't know what I'm doing, right? So it's not really logistics about can you access the data. It was where I was. But I didn't know what I was doing at some point, right? So I had co-advisors. So they both had to have special sworn status in order to come into the room and look at my computer screen. So both my professors at UCLA went and got their fingerprints done and that whole thing, which was thank you, but and it really helped. So it really helped because right at the end I was, they were both in there, I was in there, we were running stuff, and it was kind of crazy. So then I submit the papers, and I'm out of UCLA now. I start my postdoc at Michigan, and I get rejected, right? Because that's what happens when we write. That's what happens when I write a paper. It gets rejected right off the bat. Well, the comments from the reviewers said that I had to make changes. So it turned out that I was in Ann Arbor, which has an RDC, and as a postdoc, I was able to get back into the RDC to address the journal reviewers' comments. So that was really critical. Otherwise, I had some tables I thought that were great, but that no one would ever see. So I was able to, in my postdoc, revise the data and disclose it, and then that paper was able to get published. So I think you really do need help if you're a graduate student. I also think it's really great data. So I'm kind of two minds. If you have some support and you have access to an RDC for 2 years or something like that, then I think you should go ahead and go for it. It worked out for me because I was at a place where there was an RDC at both of the places that I was at before I got here, and otherwise that would have been really much tougher for me to, much higher bar for me to do it. As it is, it took a couple of years for that paper to see the light of day, which it finally did. So I think I'll stop there. That's just, yeah.
I have a question.
And who are you?
Nathaniel Proctor, Texas A&M. So as a graduate student, maybe I don't foresee myself, I'm working in the RDC. I'm supposed to be the GIS guy. Is it possible for me to be on somebody's project, but not I'm not necessarily I'm just their GIS person. Can you be on one project, 2 projects, no projects? How does that work?
As a research assistant, or yes, yeah. So my RDC actually does employ a research assistant. He has SSS. He is not a Census Bureau employee, but we loan him out to projects to have someone with a little bit of experience, especially the health data projects they may not be as familiar with large data sets or with the computing environment. And so there are RAs and just RAs who come from the advisors as well, who are not going to be co-authors. So yes, you can have a rotating slew of RAs, but again, they all have to go through the special sworn status process. So once they want to be added, it takes at least 2 to 3 months before the person can actually begin working on the data.
But once they have the SSS stat, and once their status is set,
they can be on multiple projects.
Okay. And that's okay.
I was going to say the thing that comes after special sworn status is the word employee. So when people actually go through the process, you become, in essence, a Census Bureau employee.
Unpaid.
And, we just don't pay you. So I guess that's what the special part means. But it's actually something that's relatively unique in the government. So for instance, I believe that the Internal Revenue Service wanted to have researchers come in similar to the RDCs to sort of IRS, the statistics of income. They do have people that do research. The law, that regulates the IRS doesn't actually allow them to do that. They have to pay they have to have paid employees working on their data. They cannot have someone who's unpaid. So our ability to actually have the research data centers kind of critically depends on that part of the regulations, and it's relatively unusual in the government. There's lots of places where the agency has to be paying you, and that's the only kind of employee that they have. So when you get special sworn status, you're an employee of the Census Bureau, and all of the oath that you take is, for life to protect the confidentiality of the data. So,
does that show up in the LEHD? Am I paired?
Excuse me?
I like to think of it, we're out here in the Wild West, so I like to think of you've been deputized. So you can go chasing after the question.
Do I need to stand up? Okay, I'm Amber Fox, a PhD student in the sociology department here. And I have a question for Dr. Valdez and anyone else on the panel about basically how you thought out your timeline as a graduate student working in the RDC. Did you have a backup plan in case things didn't work, or how did you manage that?
No, I did not have a backup plan. I probably needed one because you don't know before you're in there how it's going to go down. So, but I did have a sense of how long things were going to take for me to run that regression. And one of the nice things about the proposal is that it really forces you to know pretty much what that regression is going to look like, what the variables are going to be. You can make a mock regression table in your proposal that already identifies all of that stuff. So it was more about just, there's a little bit of getting in there and getting familiar with the computer and the way it's set up. There's a little bit of recoding that has to happen because sometimes the data that you're looking at is a little bit different from what you have been looking at the public. So there's a little bit of just getting familiar with the data that takes a little while. But once you do that, you can pretty much employ that model and get it out and go through disclosure. So did it affect my timeline? It didn't, but as I said, there was a push at the end for me to finish up. So that's when I had to get my advisors in there. And I was just like, look, this is getting pretty serious. I'm moving to Michigan in a few months, and I have to get out of here. So there was a push at the end. But I was able to take that data out. And there was a push again when I was trying to get out of Ann Arbor. I remember, I think I got through disclosure in a week because I was talking to that RDC administrator daily saying, I have a job. I have to go. This has to come out. And I remember, my partner was packing, and I was in the RDC trying to get get out of there. But it did work out. And I think for someone like you, Amber, I think you'd be fine. I think you're really organized, and you'll have a really good sense of what you're doing, and you have a lot of support and help, and that's exactly what you need. And so you shouldn't really shy away from working in an RDC. I think you're like a really perfect graduate student candidate. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Wei Chen. I'm from School of Rural Public Health, and I have a technical question, like if you merge the census data with other maybe nationally representative data or not representative data, do you need to put any weight to multiply it, or if yes, do you need to mention about the weight in your proposal? Thank you.
You might need to wait. It's probably not a concern of the Census Bureau that you're going to need to do that, because it's, again, as I said, we're interested in the confidentiality of the data and whether it's feasible, and whether you need to weight the data or not is not an issue for us. And if you weight that and you do your own weight, that probably adds a little bit of uncertainty to the data, which we probably like, because it adds a little bit of fuzziness to the data, so may make disclosure a little bit easier. But so yes, it does not, if you bring it outside, yes, so it sounds like it doesn't look like I answered your question. Is there another, did I miss?
it gets a little more complicated when you start combining data sets, right? I mean, basically, the data that everyone's using that the Census Bureau collects isn't really, it's, designed to be aggregated up and published. It's not really designed to be combined with lots of other data sets and used for analysis. So, I mean, I think if you were using one data set, right, and you would want to take the stratification and the weighting into account when you were doing your regression analysis. It's sort of less clear what happens when you match it to another sample and now you have a subset of what the original sample was. I mean, I think it gets a lot more complicated, right? So, I mean, fortunately, you'll have economists reviewing, the projects and not statisticians, because I think that there's a bit of a cultural divide even within the Census Bureau about, whether weighting is appropriate. I mean, I think often, they're stratifying based on industry and state, and we have county level fixed effects and state fixed effects all incorporated into the model, and that seems like it would take care of a lot of the things that they're worried about, right? So, I mean, I think it's more of a philosophical question about the weights. So
I'm glad we cleared that. Weights, the eternal. Well, let's see. We're bumping up against time.
I just go back to the previous question just for a minute. I have a little history on this. There are two Johns in the history of CES who are really important, Haltwanger and About. And I was once on a panel with About, and I gave the advice that no graduate student should ever try to do a dissertation in an RDC unless they were under the tutelage of a mentor. Well, About got infuriated and said, I've had 13 students come through, but John, they were all on one project. He has, I think, an infinite project as far as I can tell. And, you just don't mess with John. And,
I think we call them internal projects.
Yeah, there we go. They've got a language for it. He's above and beyond the rest of us in many respects. But the real point I wanted to make, though, is that doctoral dissertating students should always have a plan B, especially in this case, because maybe a data set gets pulled for some reason. What they find, this occasionally happens for good reasons. Data need to be rewritten on it. They discovered some bad data. That's not a time you want to take the risk without a backup plan. So have a backup plan. That's all.
I think I think that's great advice too. I got similar advice, and I wanted to add to that building on what you had mentioned, that one of the really great things about working up one of these proposals is you're really forced really hard to think about what it is that you want to do, especially, if it's dissertation or whatever. And in my case, I didn't realize that I had a backup until I started writing up the proposal, and I realized that I needed to do X before I got to Y. And X I could do without going through the RDC. Y I'm doing now as a faculty member. But I wouldn't have realized that unless I started going through the process and thinking really hard about what it was that I wanted to do. So the whole process, I didn't end up doing that for the dissertation. The RDC work, but I figured out that I needed to do something before I even got to that.